After 1 week with Nikon's top-of-the-line DSLR the D6, what are my thoughts? Where does the D6 fit in with the cameras that I already have? I already have the Nikon D850, which is an absolutely amazing camera with a 45 megapixel full-frame sensor. However, it has a slower frame rate than the D6, and the autofocus of the D6 is more advanced. I also have the D500, which can capture 10 frames per second and has a great autofocus system, but it is a crop-censored camera, so it isn't as great for wide-angle photography. Both the D850 and the D500 have screens that can pop out for easier composition when the camera is at different angles, which the D6 does not have. Finally, I have the D4S, which is Nikon's older pro-level flagship DSLR. Are the improvements of the D6 enough for an upgrade? As it is the top-of-the-line DSLR from Nikon, there are a ton of things that the D6 is capable of doing. And after 1 week with the camera, I definitely didn't get a chance to test everything. However, there are a few key features that I wanted to test out: autofocus, frame rate, and high ISO capability. I also wanted to explore the customization of the camera, as this turned out to be one of my favorite parts of using the D6. As you would expect, the autofocus is incredibly fast and accurate on the D6. But the autofocus system is so much more than that. There are many different autofocus modes that you can choose from to suit whatever you are trying to do. You can create your own groups and customize the size of the focus area that you use for autofocus. Like some other cameras, you can even customize the persistence of the focus points on the subject so it stays with the subject longer or quickly moves to another subject. I tended to use 3 types of autofocus. Most of the time I use single point autofocus, where I chose the focus point and put it on my subject. If there was a moving subject and I had trouble keeping my one focus point on it, I would use the 9-point dynamic autofocus. If there was an erratically moving subject, I used 3D tracking autofocus. This worked extremely well. I would start with my focus point on the subject and then switch to 3D tracking, and the D6 did an amazing job of keeping my subject in focus. Here is the beauty of the D6. I can customize these autofocus settings to easily access them with a touch of a button. I used the shutter release button for my single point autofocus. I set the AF on button so when I pressed it, the camera would seamlessly switch to the 9-point dynamic autofocus setting. When I pressed the sub-selector button, the D6 would switch to 3D tracking autofocus. This worked incredibly well and was incredibly fast. I also experimented with the face detection autofocus system by customizing the function 2 button in the front of the camera. It worked pretty well, but after having used the face and eye detection of the Nikon Z7 II, I definitely prefer the Z7 II for face and eye detection autofocus. I love the accuracy of the eye detection autofocus of the Z7 II. It was able to find the eye of my subject, and I could even switch between the eyes of my subject. Check out my video on the Z7 II to see some examples. When comparing the autofocus of the Z7 II and the D6, the Z7 II has 493 autofocus sensors that cover the entire frame, while the D6 has 105 cross-type sensors that don't extend to the edge of the frame. However, overall I found the D6 to be much faster and more accurate, especially when it came to moving subjects. The one exception was that the Z7 II did have the edge when it came to that eye and face detection autofocus. Another thing that I wanted to test with the D6 was the maximum frame rate of 14 frames per second. My D850 shoots at 7 frames per second, and my D500 shoots at 10 frames per second. How much of a difference do these extra frames make? As the D6 is a full-frame camera, I wanted to test it beside my D850. I know that the frame rate of the D6 is double that of the D850, but how much of a difference does that really make? I set up the D6 and the D850 side by side with the same lens, the 70-200 f2.8, and had my subject run through the frame. This comparison shows the frame rate of the two cameras. As you can see, I got around twice as many images from the D6 as I did from the D850. When it comes to action photography, having extra frames to choose from at the peak of the action makes all the difference. The D6 gives me twice the number of frames to choose from when compared to the D850. The thing about action photography is that the peak of action is literally a split second. and it is crucial to have as many images in that split second as possible. The D6 gives me the most options and choices when it comes to choosing an image. It seems like the high ISO performance of every newer generation of camera just gets better and better. The D6 is a full frame camera, so I wanted to compare it to my older D4S and the D850. The D6 blew the other two cameras away in terms of high ISO performance. The range of native ISO of the D850 is 64 to 25,600 and is expandable to 102,400. The native ISO range of the D4S is slightly smaller. It starts at 100 and it goes up to 25,600, and it is expandable to a higher range of 409,600. The D6 native ISO range is 100 to 102,400, and it's expandable to an incredible ISO of 3,280,000 on the upper end. The usable ISOs are only in the native range, really, so the D6 gives you an extra 2 stops of ISO in low light. But what do those results look like? Check out this side-by-side comparison. The D850 goes down to a native ISO of 64 while the other two cameras do not. As you can see, within the native ISO range, all the cameras have slight differences, but all perform well. When you get out of the native range, the image quality isn't great. Overall, the D6 is an incredible camera. Nikon's flagship DSLR camera definitely doesn't disappoint. The D6 really does excel in a number of areas, not limited to just its focusing and its frame rate of 14 frames per second, while still getting things in focus and capturing images at a high ISO. But does this camera have a place in my bag when I already have the D850, the D4S, and the D500? If I had only one camera, the D6 would be a fantastic choice because it can do pretty much anything. If I were a full-time sports photographer or someone who needed a high frame rate to capture the action at its peak, reliable fast focus and high ISO performance, then I would say yes, this is the camera for me. But with the type of photography that I do and the cameras that I already have, I think I could probably use the money that I would spend on the D6 on something else. Perhaps even the Nikon Z9.